So, welcome to the second session. Welcome back. So, we were now going to talk about the First and Second World War leading to movements of independence. Well, we can start off with maybe a quote from W.E. Du Bois, who said the problem of the 20th century was the problem of the color line, or maybe is still. And where Cominimaco says, wherever there's domination, one should expect resistance. Of course, everywhere throughout the age, since the beginning, there's been resistance with oppressions, of course. But I think what these two quotes illustrate is, you had this racial division of the world, Western countries now effectively occupying all these territories, having it claimed as theirs, but also putting into the educational system people of color and into the university people of color. And they, of course, these two concepts, if you remember from Cominimaco, like citizenship, right, that started to develop in Europe, and state sovereignty. Of course, when these people of color, the colonized people, were getting these things through university and how it works, they were like, okay, we're going to claim our state sovereignty and our citizenship as well. So they started to claim their humanity, basically in that sense, from inside that colonial state framework. So you could also see already before the First World War, there started to be Pan-African conferences and all kinds of events that would basically people from the global south started to organize with each other for their own independence and rights. And this, after the Second World War, which had let's say a huge impact on Europe, they saw their chance to really start claiming independence. So more and more countries started, because this collapse of Europe because of the Second World War, started to claim their independence. And you could see one important conference was the Bandung Conference in 1955 in Indonesia, which was hosted by Sukarno, which was the independence leader of that time Indonesia. And they formed the non-alignment movement, and that was referring like, we don't align with the hegemonical European imperialist powers. And you could see also on the picture Kwame Nkrumah, leader of Ghana, which I'll give a quote of him as well. And if you later, and if you look on the map, you see it's mostly global South countries that are part of this non-alignment movement, which was trying to help and give each other support for gaining their independence. And if you can, it still exists. I mean, it's less big prominence as then, but they stand for world peace against foreign occupations and things like this. And of course, as you know, or may not know, but a lot of these independence movements were met with a lot of violence, like the Dutch, for instance, when Nazi Germany had lost the occupation of the Netherlands, and then the World War II was over. Immediately that year, they started to campaign and go to Indonesia, to get their colony back, basically, and that led to bloody mass killings of 150,000 Indonesians. But you could say the same as well by the French in Algeria. If you look at the Algerian independence war and how many the French killed there, it goes into the tens and hundreds of thousands of people that were killed directly after the Second World War. And I think why I'm telling this, it is because basically the colonial powers didn't had a reflection moment like, oh, we did so bad, we apologize, and we give to you your independence. No, they wanted their influence back, and they still want their influence to this day. And this is where we get into neocolonialism, because what makes it new, or I mean, it's still the same, but what makes it neocolonialism is you have now political independence on paper. You have your state, which is supposedly independence of Western countries, But neocolonialism is talking about Western countries still trying to gain this influence in all kinds of ways. And this is what I will focus on today, about this, the ways in which Western countries are still doing their neocolonialism today. And I think this is an important quote by Kwame Nkrumah. He coined the term neocolonialism. He made this term, and he was part of this independence movement in Ghana, a revolutionary. And he says, the essence of neocolonialism is that the state, which is subject to it, is in theory independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty, but in reality its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from the outside. So a state that is independent on paper is still being directed and influenced from the outside. So again, back to these dimensions, because we can see neocolonialism in all these different dimensions. And maybe you want to read this quote in your own time and click on pause. It's a quote from a book by Patrice Malidoma Somme, which I maybe talk later about in the course as well. But he basically describes also, when we look at the colonial matrix of power, how basically the face of oppression has changed from basically a white face to a black face or a brown face, because basically the people have been taught how to eat, sleep, think like Europeans. So a lot of the in neocolonial period, if you look at the relationship between land theft and indigenous people and things like this, you can see still a lot is oriented towards Europe. The dominant languages in a lot of countries are still European. The curriculums are Eurocentric, etc. So a lot of things are still being maintained by the people who have been trained and oriented to think and act like Europeans. So there, and then this is also why a lot of people talk about decolonizing the mind, because you have political independence, but your mind is still being controlled by Eurocentric views through the education system that has destroyed different ways of being, relating, etc. But next to having internalized colonialism and having to mentally decolonize, there's still military efforts to this day, a lot. In terms of neocolonialism. What you see here are a few graphs. In the middle you see a list, and this is far from complete list. This is just a list of successful US regime change operations since the Second World War. This was made by William Blum, a historian. This was by 2003. So a few coups that have already been done since then are not on it, and also the unsuccessful coups are not on it. But you can see there's a lot of countries where the US has had secret military operations, or not secret, sometimes public, in a public way, coups. And you can see on the right map there, every dot on the world map, that's a foreign US military base. So the US has basically, in almost every southern country, has basically military bases. I think they have between 600 and 1200. Nobody really knows how much they have, but it's huge. And if you look at the military budget, the US has almost as much military budget as the entire rest of the world. And if you include Europe to it, it becomes almost 3/4. So they have a huge military power and they use it. And in the US backyard of Latin America, you see there were 56 foreign interventions done since the Second World War. And I included a video that you can watch if you like, about the School of the Americas, for instance, which is literally, and you can read this quote if you like, by clicking on pause. It's basically a military institution in the US that is training soldiers, militaries, to basically wage war against their own people in Latin America. This is one of the clear-cut institutions that is neocolonial. And if you look at the SOA graduates, like the list of people who have been graduated, where a lot of these graduates have been trialed by courts, by criminal courts, for things like genocide, murder, all kinds of atrocities, and then had been trained in this institution. And you could see the response because you had the Cold War, and there were a lot of independence movements happening, or democratic movements happening, which the West tried to resist, and especially as the new, let's say, global power, the US in this period had all kinds of operations against these people. So who you see here are quite famous examples of people who were being opposed by the empire, which is, you see Mohammad Mossadegh was a democratically elected leader from Iran. He was opposed and made a coup against. You had Allende from Chile, Patrice Lumumba from the Congo. Well, you had, and these three were democratic movements who were then done a coup against. And on the right you see also Che Guevara and Castro, of course, and the Sukarno, which were not democratically elected movement, but movements who did rise up to power through armed struggle. So you had different kinds. Sometimes it was democratic, sometimes it was through armed revolution. But in all the cases, they were seen as enemies. So it didn't matter if it was democratic or not. In all cases, there was the Red Scare. They were all portrayed as communist. The threat against Western freedom and everything. So they had to be opposed. For the sake of basically our Western companies. So they were vilified as well in the media, and you could see. I mean, it's literally a joke to say that the US or the West stands for democracy, because they have always denied people's right to vote, citizenship, and all these things, and now they come to give the world democracy. And you could see this also clearly with who they put in place of the democratic elected leaders. So these are some examples of people they put in power after they did a coup. They were often, I mean, almost always fascist dictators with huge crimes against humanities. You have Pinochet, which is really infamous. You have Mobutu, which is infamous. Suharto killed, I think, hundreds of thousands of communists. You have the Shah in Iran. So you have all these kinds of leaders who have been put and kept in power by US and Western influence against democratic movements, against anti-colonial movements. The response was fascism and oppression. That there you can also see that there's I think I've said enough about that one. So I'll go on. And of course, behind this is the interests of multinationals. So Chiquitas, and you had Jacobo Arbenz, I think. It was in Latin America. I think it was Guatemala. I'm not sure about this. Maybe I'm mixing up countries. But you had a country where there was Jacobo Arbenz was being elected and also had socialist reforms this was what I wanted to say. These leaders, what they often did was they were socializing. That this was the threat against why the West said the Red Scare and portrayed as communists, because they were basically often taking back the land or the oil or some of the resources of the country and aiming to redistribute it for the people. So putting the resources back for the people, and who were in hands of foreign companies. So this was what it was the fight against. And these dictators, of course, did collaborate with Western companies and would give back space for private enterprise to do their things. And you can see another example for these private enterprising companies. One example was Chiquita, when they were threatened to lose their banana plantations and land. They asked the US to intervene and do a coup, which they did, and then to maintain the system. And you can see the same with Shell. You had, for instance, the Ogoni Master Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, a huge Dutch oil company, where they killed the 9 Ogoni people. They were basically the indigenous people there who resisted the oil grabbing there, because it also pollutes their rivers, their living environment, and everything. and people were killed for speaking up against that. So that's also multinational violence, a form of neocolonialism today, which there are countless examples of this. Also with land grabbing today, I think every week there's at least 4 to 5 on average indigenous people killed, which is about land contestation and forced grabbing and things like this. So you can see these military institutions, the state system, and everything that is there still protecting multinational companies who were there way before these countries had their own independence. So their interests are being defended. And if you remember Kwame Nkrumah's quote saying, for neocolonialism, that the economic policy is being directed from the outside. So you have political independence, but your economic policy is direct from the outside, which he describes as neocolonialism. The neocolonial institutions are the IMF, the World Bank, World Trade Organization, etc. These are institutions that influence the economic policies of countries. The way that they do that basically is, the IMF gave loans to about 2/3 of the whole world, like countries having loan. Let's say you have a crisis, you need to take a loan for something. And then there's strings attached to these loans. So you have to restructure your economy to pay back the loan. So in Europe, at least, a famous example is that in Greece, you had a lot of budget cuts and the neoliberal things was happening through the structural adjustment programs of the IMF, which people rise against because then poverty is increasing and things like this, because they say you have to pay back the debt. And then, you have to tighten your budget as a state. And you could see as the IMF was giving around loans over the whole world, you could see, for instance, in Africa, because the IMF came, I don't know which year it was founded actually, but I know the height of the neoliberal period was since the 70s. And you could see that the more depth countries were having, the more foreign aid also came in. So as the state capacity was shrinking, because in the structural adjustment programs that you see listed there, a few examples, which you can also find in the article of Dean, is that you see basically the capacity of the state shrinking, and then you can become dependent also on foreign aid later on. And what is also striking about these structural adjustment programs is in their ideology, they say that you have to privatize, so give up state possession and give this to private companies because they are more efficient, etc. And you have to do trade liberalization, open your borders for foreign companies and things like this. And they say this would be good for your economy. And what's funny, and that's the book of Haju Chang, Kicking Away the Ladder, there has been no Western country, no developed, what we call developed countries today that has taken this route, just go through free market. They have never done free market. They first, you've seen the history. They loot, etc. And through war and theft, but also they had protective barriers for their own companies. So in the competition and in their own markets, they would have protective restriction for their own companies, and they would subsidize also the development of certain industry. So oil companies, phone companies, internet, railway systems, all these things which were later maybe privatized were first subsidized or made by the state, flying airplane industries, etc. So to say, okay, you need to liberalize and leave it to privatization, that basically means giving Western companies who already have an advantage free space to take over the market. And also what is in EMF policy is to reorientation to export economy, but these exports are not high-end products. Let's say these are often raw materials. So I know it's a lot of information, but you can read it in the article of Dean. You can read about it in Kicking Away the Ladder of Haju Chang. There's lots of good documentaries. If you would like to have them, I can send you more links and tips, so you can get up to date about economic neocolonialism. And then, of course, the arms trade, which I explained to you as well, to export arms to collaborators was always important, and a certain local elite during colonialism. The same is true today. If you look, for instance, that almost most of the arms go to Saudi Arabia, which is the country who has been supporting groups like ISIS, etc. We had the fight against the Russian communists in Afghanistan, where we supported the Mujahideen, which later became Al-Qaeda, etc. So arming different extremist groups for our agendas in different countries is still part, and has always been part of implementing and gaining control in areas. And you see in terms of arms trades, the Western countries also have the hugest chunk of arms trading. And if it comes to white saviorism, the mission civilisatrice, you can still see it today. To give an example, if the invasion of Iraq was called Operation Iraqi Freedom, we have to oppose a horrible dictator, and I mean, he was horrible. We armed him, so we arm horrible people. So we armed Saddam, and then later we planned a coup on him. But yeah, it's more about the framework. So Operation Iraqi Freedom, we come to bring freedom, and we have brought nothing but destruction. I mean, to give you some figures on Iraq, it's the most known war because it was such a live broadcasted war based on lies. I mean, we would go in for nuclear weapons, which weren't there. We would go for, what was the other lie? Oh yeah, there were terrorist groups. They weren't there because, I mean, they are funded by Saudi Arabia. So if you have to invade a country, invade your ally, but we don't. And to bring freedom. And you could see in 2007, there were 4 million refugees, 3 million orphans, tens of thousands wounded, and 8 million people who had needed humanitarian aid directly after the invasion. You had 1 million deaths because of the war on terror there. And also before we came in, we had brutal sanctions there, which cost the lives of 500,000 children. You can Google that. 500,000 children died in Iraq. And maybe a nice article about that is an article by Nafis Ahmed, unworthy victims. And this was usually because we destroyed and bombed the infrastructure locally, like water purification system. So a lot of children would die just simply of diarrhea and lack of access to medicines. And you can see also really colonial tropes. For instance, when Gaddafi was opposed, one article of The Guardian headed, Gaddafi supplies troops with Viagra to encourage mass rape. So this idea of the savage Arabian dictator that goes to rape women. I mean, this was proven false immediately after, but like things like this, or the invasion of Afghanistan, you see a poster of Amnesty International, keep the progress going, like, hey, save these women. You see veiled women behind, so the oppressed women by the barbarians. So this image of having to save and civilize other places is in a different form, but still with us. And next to it, you see the poster that was also in the video that I posted that says, the American flag has not been planted in foreign soil to acquire more territory, but for humanity's sake. So I guess this shows Mission Iraqi Freedom. We do it for humanity's sake. To summarize, you can see different facets in culture, ideology, military, economic trading, ways to keep your hegemony. Neocolonialism is very much kicking and alive today. About next week, we will talk more about the erasure of race during the Second World War and the forgetting of race. You'll see that through the literature. and I'll try also to talk about reparations a bit, because I think this has been an important but unrecognized movement as well, in terms of trying to undo the damage that colonialism has done. So that was that. I hope to speak to you next week.